I repeat from the beginning, good morning to everybody. And thank you very much, Alex, for the introduction. And thank you very much for this opportunity to share some insights on the work that we have been doing in the past with colleagues and friends from all over the world. Today, I would like to talk about practices on assessing outcomes to improve migration corridors. Usually, we always think from the perspective of countries of origin, what are the criteria, what are the parameters that maximizing the outcomes of the migration experience, both for the individuals, the state, the families, and the community. I will then share some empirical insights on these classification exercises that we are doing for some origin countries in the Asia and in the African continents. And finally, also to catch the attention, the interest of participants from countries of destinations, we are trying to reflect on some new emerging trends, both relating to the challenges brought about COVID-19 in the short term, and how these align with some skills development insights relating more to the long trend. So I hope that I raise the interest of you, and I look forward also for the discussion after. So the first part, what are migration outcomes for countries of origin? Let's try to look at, for example, European states, which are usually hosting migrants as destination countries. So let's try to see them from the perspective of the countries of origin. So the first issue is that for whom a migration outcome is an amenity. So when we benchmark outcomes, we always think them as an amenity. So the political economy aspect is who benefits from what. So there are there are outcomes from the migrant from the family left behind, outcomes from the government of the country of origin. For instance, the limitation of brain drain or the releasing of unemployment vis-a-vis, for instance, a migration that maximizes remittances for the family or wage for the migrant itself. The second issue is that we try to benchmark these outcomes based on three key criteria. So the first one is feasibility. I mean, how can we make migration happen? Is it feasible to send people to a country of destination? Second is quality, meaning how much the individual migrants get out of the migration process. And we will see what are the parameters in a framework of analysis that does not only look at the numeraire of financial outcomes, but also at the idea of decency of work within the migration experience. And finally, also desirability. This is something that we learned talking step by step with governments of countries of destination. More and more, they are interested to select the segment of the population intending to migrate. Hence, we understand by advising countries of origin that they have a preference in the kind of skill segment of the vacancy they want to tap on. Let's try to see from the very beginning the idea that, I mean, the outcomes of the migration outcome are the most heterogeneous. For instance, in this slide, I try to show how education, which is often promoted by the economic literature as the key determinants, one of the key determinants for the outcome in the labor market, is only part of the story when it comes to migration. So we see two migrants on the left side of the screen and on the right side of the screen with the same level of education, both entering a labor market of semi-skilled jobs, but ending up into very different situations. So the manual example is on the right side, a migrant working in the hospitality sector. We can see that he's working as a waiter, very likely to benefit de jure and de facto from the protection of a labor code, that protects him both on paper by the law and also in the practice by allowing, for example, to be unionized or so on. On the left side, we see instead domestic workers also required to have a semi-skilled level of competence to access this job, but ending up in an atypical working condition of domestic work in which she may probably experience compulsory deductions of the wage, withdrawable payment, and even at times, given that she lives and works in the same place, we also have the likelihood that she may be in condition of forced labor. So education is not only the yardstick that we consider. Now, the work on which the findings are built, collected, are very much linked to specific recruitment channels. And let's see what are the parameters that we have seen matter the most in ending up in a good migration experience. First of all, the country of destination, mostly linked to specific recruitment channels. We see, for example, that those countries in which which nationals and migrant workers are benefiting from the same labor code and benefiting from, for example, the same collective agreements and the same benefits of tripartite negotiations, are likely to be in a better position than in those countries in which there are double standards. The type of jobs classified as low-skilled, semi-skilled, high-skilled, and professional. This matter. I mean, not only the education and the supply side experience of work experience of the migrants, but the job it ends up in. Finally, the educational attainment and the TVET qualification from the supply side of the out migrant before departure. Now, let's look at the first pillar of migration outcomes. Well, first of all, we look at the in-migration systems. For the in-migration systems, we are talking about the admission policies, the labor approval processes, and other anecdotal evidence able to enrich the analysis. Okay, so the channels, the rules of the regulation, the rules of the game regulating the entry of migrants. Second, the country of destination needs of low and semi-skilled labor. Usually this is determined by the demographic of the labor market. If a labor market in the country of destination is aging, it is more likely that it will attract labor force from abroad. Second, the employers have difficulties in recruiting from the local labor market. This may depend on how attractive are local vacancies for the national population, or in general, the availability of nationals to get the jobs that are set out by the market. Second, how do we benchmark migration outcomes? Quality. Well, the first aspect here is the working and living condition of foreign workers. So first, we have de jure, all workers are covered by the same labor code and benefit from the same collective agreement. Second, how provisions of the labor market are enforced. So this is quite critical because migrants are overrepresented in those sectors and occupations where tripartite instruments are weaker, in which protection is more difficult to be enforced. So again, what the kind of quality benchmarks that are true for the labor market as a whole or for the nationals may not also end up in a better protection for migrant workers. Then we have done a quite interesting work on how to look at not only wages, but wages as one of the determinants for remittances prospect. The states are very much interested into it. So we try to control the wage for the cost of living as a measure to proxy the money remitted home. So basically we have an indication not only of how much the worker get, but what are the compulsory deduction, what are the open costs, and what are the living costs to understand how much the country of origin and the family left behind benefit monetarily from migration. Now, desirability, this is a very interesting aspect also for the state. We see that states of the countries of origin are becoming picky in selecting and sorting out the priority for those who are out migrating. So integration prospect vis-a-vis circularity of migration. Some countries are very happy if the out migrant will settle for good in a country of destination. Usually we see that there are a range between 12 and 16 years in which the out migrant is connected to the country of origin. Some other countries instead are very much interested in the circularity of migration. So in the way to which after the migration spell, the migrant is likely to come home with savings, money, and the skills that the endogenous development of the country of origin needs. Well, another issue of desirability is very pragmatic. I mean, countries of origin are very characterized by youth bulge, by labor surpluses. So sometimes they need to create out migration opportunities for those segments more exposed to unemployment. Very key, and also linked to the point number 5, they want to limit brain drain also in the very short term. And this is very much linked to the care economy. So to those sectors in which the country of origin has to operate education services, health services, and other services related to service to the persons. So the limitation of the brain drain, and slowly, very slowly, also the idea that in the midterm, they will get back skills, so they will get a brain gain from migration. Finally, very important, geographical and cultural proximities. So usually we see that countries of origin have a quite clear idea in mind of the countries they want to partner with. And this relates also to a common view of the world, to communities and societies where their cultural values can be represented. And also countries and governments that are historically linked by diplomatic ties or by other kinds of trade and economic connection. Now, let me turn to the second part in which we also try to see how different countries of origin from all over the world perform in terms of these classification criteria. So the first slide is about structural labor shortages. So we try to look at some measures of dependency of the population. So we try to see how many people are employed over the persons outside the working age population. It's a very good measure because it looks at how many people are actively engaged in economic activities, the employed, over the kind of people who are not, but not only who are not, but who are also exposed to benefit from care economy services, mainly children and the elderly. We also looked at not only the variation statically in a certain observation 2019, but we also try to understand how much and how fast each country of destination is entering a dependency phase. Now, the second part is very much about jobs opening by skills requirement. So we have now projected on this chart the forecasted job opening by skill requirement in 5 EU countries, taken from CEDEFOP work and elaborated by myself to understand not only what types of job openings we have, but the magnitude of job open, the stock, the number of job opening that we have, because size matters. When you of course, for example, here we see the labor market of Denmark, which is very attractive because we have very high wages, very important possibilities to maximize monetary benefit, and also the presence of employment protection legislation. But somehow for the country of origin is easier to enter a market like Poland or Romania, which is larger in size. And so we see that Poland, I mean, due to farm and construction and manufacturing labor market needs, rank very high, together with Romania, Portugal, and Czech Republic. I have to say that in the initial screening made requested by countries of origin, countries in the Prague Process region are very much, countries of destination in the Prague Process region are becoming very appealing to countries all over the world. Now, let's see now in the market of semi-skilled, how do we benchmark occupation? Again, I try to make a visual representation of these opportunities, trying to combine the type of vacancy in the semi-skilled occupation together with the size, to how many jobs are brokered out by the labor demand. So we see that the highest in absolute and relative term are market-oriented skilled agriculture worker, followed by personal service and care workers, drivers and mobile plant operators, building and related trade workers, and finally also a space in the manufacturing sector with metal, machinery, and related workers. Now let's move to the low skilled. Low skilled, very important, because somehow migration is perceived by countries of origin all over the world, not only as a way to cash in money in the short term, but also a way to retrain workers, to retrain people in their population, in their economy, without having to shoulder the costs of retraining. So again, agriculture ranks the highest with approximately 500,000 workers in demand over the period 2018-2026, followed by cleaners and helpers. So this kind of workers linked to the domestic work sectors and services, but without the requirement of a TVET certificate to perform their duties. This is the difference between the definition of low-skilled and semi-skilled workers. Well, again, mining, construction, and manufacturing workers are very important, together with refuse workers and food preparation assistants. Again, here we combined these quantitative numbers with some qualitative research in which we try to understand what are the key determinants behind the numbers. And in the low-skilled occupation, what makes the real difference is the language barrier. It looks like that workers in jobs in manufacturing require a very basic knowledge of the language, together with certain forms of core skills such as attitude and motivation, because the factory, the establishment all over the world works in the language of the country of destination. Now, we have also tried to benchmark, to look at to what extent there are integration prospects for permanent settlers. And here we see that Portugal ranks the high, followed by New Zealand and Denmark. And we see that we have the Czech Republic, Romania, and Poland ranking higher in terms of anti-discrimination, for instance, with Romania, and also in terms of Poland, in terms of family reunion. Lower values are instead registered for labor market mobility and the long-term residence. Now, wages and remittances, this is the kind of analysis that I have described before. So first, we look at the average annual wage, and then we look at the living costs, which have to be shouldered by the migrants. Another interesting exercise that it's still in its cradle, but we understand that it's the one that interests the most countries of origin, is a diagnostic classification of in-migration systems. So the rules of the game, what are the parameters of the rules of the games, of the laws and regulations which are regulating admission, which are regulating entry in the country in the countries of destination. So we have the presence of temporary visa, the skills shortage list, and the presence of an employers-based system. Very important here to understand that what is very much valued by countries of origin is a quite diversified system of visa, so that the different migration pathways can benefit from a visa system that suit the kind of recruitment channel. Second, we have an extensive literature, also thank you to the World Bank and to the ILO, on the analysis of migration costs. So migration costs are now parameterized with travel cost and excessive recruitment fees, whereas the informal cost, the irregular costs, which are relating to the symptoms of human trafficking, such as over-indebtment, such as deception, contract substitution, and other yardsticks, are put in the risk factors, which are, of course, the risk to deception, contract substitution, debt bondage, and the risk to labor exploitation. I had prepared a summary trying to summarize the different kind of recruitment cost in a country where there is a regular migration system in place, and such as, for instance, the countries in South Asia, and more in the countries of destination of the Prague Process, in which there is we remember that Poland in 2019 issued more than 1.1 million temporary visas, so people can enter for labor issues. Vis-a-vis countries, for instance, where admission is made by regularization, so people enter with tourist visas, or they enter with visas for other purposes, and only after a certain time they are regularized. I try to go fast. I really hope that I'm not losing your attention. We are also working with my team to parameterize in-migration systems based on other parameters. So first of all, on the trade-off between the incidence of regular migration channel vis-a-vis the quality of migration. And you see on the right side channel the risk of deception vis-a-vis the stringency of the in-migration system. Now I enter in the part that I hope, I expect will raise more issues for discussion. So these are some policy reflections for the EU countries of destination, among which there is a group of our countries, the Prague Process, and also some snapshots on what I have experienced in government consultations relating to COVID-19. Now, so recruitment, what do we say? Well, we see that it's very effective to study occupational families. Occupational families, one separate from each other. And why? Well, because if you study an occupational family, you are able also to grasp demand, which is across sectors. And usually, the unit of reference is the local labor market, in which there are 1, 2, 3 sectors composing the industrial district that quantify the demand for labor. This I quote two professions which are very much high in demand and relate to the demand of labor of many sectors. One is forklift operators, and the other one is numerical control machine operators. Another issue that we have seen is the need to diversify a visa system, either in the direction of relaxing it or in the direction of tightening it. But the more applicants and employers, the more type of visas employers and applicants can resort to, the more we are likely to reduce the gap between the jure situation envisaged by the law and the experience seen see in the reality. Again, recruitment is a very good word to read the migration channel. Let's talk about amnesties. There were proposals for amnesties both in Italy and Portugal. We have experience now. We have quite a good evaluation of the experience of the amnesty in Morocco. So which amnesties work? Where amnesties are effective, and how to avoid that amnesties have an unintended negative consequence, such as promotion of regular migration. I mean, this deserves a webinar by itself. To what extent we are serving employers and workers in regularizing their situation, and to what extent or the presence of labor market institution will allow for the amnesty to be or not to be an instrument that provides incentives which are unintended. I can elaborate if there are some participants more interested in this kind of migration policy tool. Another important what we learned is that the lessons learned from amnesties should be drawn sector by sector, and we will see if we have a specific interest. Now, let's look at, again, what we have seen after 2015. We have seen some difficulties in countries of destination, especially, I mean, I'm referring here in Western Europe and in the NAFTA region. There were difficulties to combine humanitarian support with labor market integration. Very interestingly, in a very interesting way, we saw that the language barriers were more important than what we expect. Labor markets require workers to have a certain proficiency, even a specific occupational specific proficiency of the language they speak. We have seen, so language barriers are, in my opinion, one of the big elephants in the room. Sometimes we talks about a very articulated classification of skills, of demand, but the language barrier, to be able to communicate in the language in which the establishment operates, is key, and it cannot be learned with a 24-hour course. 24-hour because it's the number of hours required to get the patent for forklift operators, which is a very good job. Second, alphabetization barrier often are occupation specific. So what we did not work enough, I think, is in understanding which kind of language skills workers in the low and semi-skilled sector require to perform the job duty. I think that this is a very interesting area of development with in migration, because a certain proficiency of language, the case of Bangladesh or Pakistan, showed that can be learned as a pre-departure service. Second, cost of integration higher than expected. This is something that we can elaborate further. And we don't have final findings on that, but this is what I sense, at least from the big giant governments in Western Europe. Now, let's talk about COVID. What did we see happening? I mean, many migrants went back to their country, leaving segment of the population unattended in terms of labor needs, meaning these countries will have to recruit either domestically or again from abroad workers to sustain their economic system. Second, segments of the economy not elastic to business cycle will continue to require labor even if they are in recession. The kind of personal care service which is very high in demand will not decrease as a result of an economic recession. Employers and HR managers are still dazed. I mean, I ran a survey on the recruitment implications after COVID, and the main findings is panic among CEOs and among HR managers. So somehow the trend now, apart from the agricultural sector, in which we need to support the harvest of 2020, we see the recruitment issues frozen with the halt of the production. But we see that among the many different type of recruitment methods, they wanted to invest in the post-COVID time in a referral system. So in a system of recruitment in which there is a skin in the game. Migrants confirmed to be those more exposed, not only to the usual sources of violation of human and labor rights, but also to the specific risks of COVID-19. And we saw the meat processing case or the testing results in Singapore, where 85% of the infected were non-national citizens. EU economies are now tied in a double threat with the presence of labor migrants. I mean, we understand that EU economies cannot operate without migration. How labor market will adjust in time of recession, and especially how the demand for migrants will be taken into consideration with the issue of high unemployment, how the nationals in the EU will be able to take jobs which were considered not attractive before. Finally, we see agriculture and care remain very high on the list. And I think that there are very good deals, very good opportunities that can be brokered for countries of origin in a situation in which employers need labor in these sectors. Occupational shift of EU nationals into jobs previously dominated by migrants. We have seen in the agriculture sector in Germany, but there are many other examples on which I am working on with governments. Finally, shifts in demand for labor in manufacturing. That's quite interesting. I mean, the Green New Deal was proposing a reshoring of certain activities, and somehow the new economy after COVID will go in this direction. I mean, there will be an incentive to reshore by capital mobility, because there is a curve of international mobility. It's more difficult for factors of production to move, and by an increase of demand of manufacturing in certain goods and services in the new normal after COVID. We have seen it with PPE, with medical equipment. We see, let's say, we saw a degree of autarky somehow increased, and as it happened in other contexts, we expect that the new normal will be different from the situation of the world in 2019, so before the COVID crisis. I leave again the floor to Irina, hoping that something of what I said raised the attention of our audience. And thank you very much for giving me this chance.